Day 652 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a quick look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 337,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 990, just short of 1k, in the past day. And given this typical daily loss rate, analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, or the ISW, are informing that Russian forces may be suffering losses along the entire front lines of Ukraine at a rate that's close to the rate at which Russia is currently generating new forces, which really does present a number of armament and logistical challenges for the Russian army. Ipso facto, the defense or Russian invasion really isn't meeting Russian expectations. Then as for the hardware losses, so 8 tanks, 26 armoured combat vehicles, 12 artillery, and also note the 30 fuel tanks and vehicle tanks of various types, which actually eclipsed armoured combat vehicle losses recently, and both of which that have become increasingly vulnerable to Ukrainian FPV drone strikes that have been operating at or behind the enemy lines. Then we'll head across to the map today, where Russia fired a small number of Shahed drones into Ukraine overnight, but those are just mere words. So without further ado, here's what the Russian drone UAVs, cruise missiles, and ballistic missile routes actually look like from September through November, up to November at least, as a visual representation. So as you may see here, yellow is the Shahed drones, which is what Russia most heavily relies on to attack Ukraine these days with. Then red is the cruise missiles, like the sea-launched Caliber missiles and the air-launched KH-101s or the KH-555s. And purple is the ballistic missiles, such as the surprisingly horribly performing Iskander missiles. Now, the first thing that you'll probably notice is that is a lot of activity that is actually not really going in a straight line, with the small exception of the ballistic missiles there. And the reason being, the drones and cruise missiles have more maneuverability in comparison, as they either evade or attempt to evade Ukrainian air defense systems by going around known or probable deployment sites. Although, these drones can become a victim of their own success, as routes into Ukraine become exposed and over time have become less successful on subsequent attempts. But in the end, as you can see here, drones and missiles are almost exclusively fired from the north through Sumy and other adjacent oblasts, and from the south via the Black Sea and Crimea itself. And in many ways, it's a map of what Russia is attempting to achieve. So whether it's the targeting of the Odessa port infrastructure in the south, or suspected Ukrainian airfield locations at Melnitsky in the west, or trying to wreak havoc on the capital of Kyiv, or this noisy looking patch in the south that is a combination of places like Mykolaiv and Kryvyi Rih for the taking out of civilian power infrastructure, but also utilized as a main gateway route to other locations in a much broader sense too. Now, do keep in mind, the reverse map does indeed exist, as for Ukrainian drone sorties striking into Russia, although that infographic map is not going to see the light of day for some time, for some obvious operational security reasons. Then back to the map, and before I jump all the way into Ukraine, we'll briefly move to Moscow for a moment in Russia, where the Elektrozavod factory is on fire, and is a manufacturer that produces electrical equipment for civilian and military purposes. And just imagine living in a high-rise in Moscow over the past 12 months or so. You must see fires every single week, and on some occasions, even daily. It's almost like a completely normal phenomenon that some Russians may just start to accept as a daily reality. Now, no word on the specific cause of this event, But if you've watched the channel enough, you'll know that it interests me to occasionally speculate on the difficult realities that Russian manufacturers have to contend with through the forceful hand of their Kremlin overlords. Then we'll move back to the main map today, and we'll head out into the Donbass, where we've seen some additional footage in the aftermath of a Ukrainian strike just yesterday onto an oil depot near Donetsk city. And you can certainly see in some shots of the video footage there of thousands of holes from the HIMARS GIMLARS rocket tungsten balls, or more accurately, the tungsten kinetic energy penetrators, which doesn't have the same ring to it now, does it? Then moving across to Ukrainian-held Avdiivka, right next door actually, which is a real embarrassing thorn in Russia's side given its close proximity of as little as, depending on how you'd like to count it, 9, 10 kilometers, maybe 6 miles from Russian-occupied Donetsk city, which is the most populous city in the oblast of the same name. But moving into the nitty-gritty, as for the northern flank, the updates appear much like the previous day, with multiple reports stating that Ukrainian units had managed to push back the Russian forces east of the Avdiivka coke plant there, but also with an adjustment in the grey zone, favouring the Ukrainian armed forces. Then just north of here, in Stepova, where Russia has sent group after group to take positions inside this settlement. For instance, Ukrainian Bradley M2s have been operating from the more central location to the settlement. And in fact, you can see its fire here in a freeze frame from the Bradley in the direction of the easterly positions where the Russian presence is. Then just briefly, somewhere in the east, a rare Russian self-propelled mortar piece, the Hosta 120mm, was destroyed. According to the Russian military, it was destroyed with the help of the Ukrainian heavy drone, the Baba Yaga. So we're seeing that again. Then we'll head right across today to the Kherson region and start out in Krinky as we continue to see the Russian forces being pushed back out of the southern outskirts and further from the town of Krinky, with also, most recently, the elimination of 3 Russian infantry fighting vehicles that were located right here to the southwest of the settlement, in this instance taken out by Ukrainian FPV drones. And that's really what's happening here in the wider space. So we've got many Ukrainian drones, the FPV drones and the scout drones, so operating behind enemy lines. It's really not safe for the first few kilometers, to say the least, for the Russian forces stationed here. Oh, and then also the big news out of this region today is how Russia announced the evacuation of civilians and officials from occupied Novokakhovka to be done by the 13th of December, which all seems to show a lack of belief on their part of the Russian forces stationed here, as it would appear that the Russian forces may be expecting similar Ukrainian bridgeheads to successfully form at this location as well, which certainly seems more likely than ever now. And so what is this anyway? Is it a goodwill gesture to pull back like that? A feint or more advantageous positions, as Russia once said, I believe in the north when they had to give up Kharkiv. But it's really all just a bit of Russian logic, isn't it? Oh, and then as for this oblast, technically speaking, we have some interesting intel updates that show that Russia has moved a lot of its helicopter fleet to further away makeshift locations. For instance, this one at Strilkova on the Arabat Spit that connects to Crimea. Now, previously, these helicopters were stationed closer to the Dnipro River, and the same can be said for the Zaporizhia airfields too. And taking a look at the measurements, which I haven't explicitly checked before recording this video, so it's no coincidence that this location is probably just outside the range of the 165 kilometer ATACMS Block 1A range. And yep, there we go, just above it. So we're looking at 165 plus kilometers there. And these ATACMS, which you may remember, were used to destroy or damage roughly 20 Russian choppers in the Zaporizhia and Luhansk oblasts back in October in a very unannounced fashion. But the missile of consequence rarely arrives lubed. In other words, first use was how Ukraine announced to Russia about its newly available longer-ranged area of effect cluster of submunitions ATACMS missiles capability. Interestingly, it's expected that Ukraine currently has no additional ATACMS missiles in its inventory anymore, but Russia cannot know this for sure. After all, they never got the memo, the first warning, you see. So the calculus of war has forever changed as it relates to the stationing of Russian aircraft fleets, which causes all sorts of ranged bottleneck issues with other offensives, or even the more isolated assault operations at various contact points on the front line. They just have to travel a lot further and then a lot further back. Not to mention all the additional time involved with that. Then we'll head across to some news for today. Start out with some Ukrainian hardware news. So journalists were given a brief glimpse of the absolute plethora of newly Ukrainian-built Magura V5 naval drones, which exist at an undisclosed location near the Dnipro River. Now, the Ukrainian commander of this naval drone unit stated that Ukraine has enough of these bad boys now to destroy the rest of the Russian Black Sea naval fleet. And we do certainly see plenty here. But one thing I'll add here is that, and as we've learned, timing is everything, and Ukraine uses a complete fusion of intelligence to get the best outcome when using specialized weapons like these to make a discernible impact on the battlefield, or at sea in this case. Then in some other hardware news, Ukraine will receive all 14 Vampire air defense systems from the US that were ordered as part of military aid, and with their cutting-edge advanced sensors and surveillance equipment, they can be attached to pretty much anything, like the Humvee that you saw there. And do note, it's not firing the 35mm autocannon munitions like that of the Gepard, but rather it's equipped with rocket-based weaponry, which has been specifically designed for engaging and neutralizing unmanned aerial system drones. Then moving across to some news that everybody saw coming, Russian President Vladimir Putin has now announced that he will be seeking a 5th term as president, which means by 2024, this guy will have been in power for 25 years, a quarter century. Such a long time. President for life, the classic mark of a dictatorship. Then in some other news, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is said to be optimistic that an upcoming meeting in Paris with the Hungarian Prime Minister will pave the way for a mutual agreement by next week concerning Ukraine's bid to join the European Union. Now, with the context being that the European Union's process for admitting new members requires unanimous agreement from all current member states. Now, many of you guys might see me as an optimistic guy, but I'm really not when it comes down to this guy, Viktor Orban. But where there's a will, there's a way, as the European Union would find another way to make it work without Hungary if push came to shove. Then moving across to another Russian military mobilization blunder segment. So in this one, the wives and relatives of the mobilized Russian men are at it again. Now these ones are from a specific organization called the Way Home organization. And long story short, they say it's wrong to mobilize their family members, and they say that they stand for demobilization, and that they're a growing movement. And when you think about it from the Kremlin perspective, it's quite inflammatory remarks being made here on the political level by these folk. but they probably have nothing left to lose at this point after the family's destroyed, loss of income, all sorts of things. So here they are at it again, and apparently growing, which I do believe. And I might add to that, as per a list of 50 life lessons from an 80-year-old man that has been taped to my wall at home for some time, lesson 28 clearly states, beware of the person who has nothing to lose, which is probably countless relatives of the mobilized now. Then as for a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys, I've been a bit busy. Usually I've got 2 or 3. I'm going to do a bit of a rapid fire segment one day soon. But just for this one to round it off, so Uncle Solly from Russian State Media TV is at it once again. Not just talking about the taking over the Baltics, Poland, or even Germany, but now it's Lisbon too. Lisbon, Portugal, that is. And he wasn't just saying that as a figure of speech either, as a panelist tried to correct him, but he did double down and was 100% serious on the matter. And isn't it funny how we might find this even more bizarre, these sorts of statements, if we hadn't already become so desensitized by so much of the nonsensical trash talk that Uncle Solly and the Russian state media spew outwardly every day at this point. So that's got to be it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe. Thanks again for all the support. And yeah, really just everything. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.